Thanks very much for coming, guys. I don't know, before I actually get started, I see a few familiar faces, but I would actually like to ask, how many of you make photo books? Hands up. Great. How many of you are photographers? Better. Printers? None. Booksellers? 1, 2. Look, today we have this amazing lineup with speakers here, and our aim is to find out as much as we can, so that when you go away, you actually have a little bit of advice, some inspiration, you find something new, you're taking away something that you can actually use for your own practice. It's making photo books in Australia is a wonderful thing. It's an easy way to send your books around the world, to introduce your work to people overseas, to introduce your work to people here. It's sorry. I still believe it's when I did a festival 4 years ago, I thought a photo book was a wonderful object to use to tell your story, to introduce your work to different people, and I still stand by that. So having this panel here, it's amazing because you can ask all of these amazing questions. Look, I guess I'm not going to change the format too much. It's I think we are going to keep it as every panel discussion, the people introduce themselves. We will ask some questions, and then we open the floor for you to ask questions, of questions we haven't thought about, things you always wanted to ask. So maybe I pass it on to, would you like to start, Stuart, because you have the control of the computer.
It's not an error. Okay, so thanks. So I wanted to keep this reasonably brief so that we have the most time to talk about all of this. And so I just put together a very brief kind of recent history of projects, just to introduce, I guess, my practice. So my name is Stuart Geddes. I'm a book designer, occasional editor, occasional publisher, occasional printer. I'm also an PhD candidate and an educator at RMIT. And I guess there's the books that I've done over the last however long, mostly in and around dealing with subjects in and around architecture and art. I play a number of different roles in these books. I'm as I was kind of saying, I'm sometimes just the designer. I try in most of my collaborations with people to be involved as early as I can, and I'm usually, as part of the design process, involved in structural editorial kind of conversations, and the production design of a book is incredibly important, an incredibly important part of the design of the book to me. So how it's made, how it's printed, how it's bound. I've actually done. Sorry, I'll get to that in a sec. I like to think that these books don't share many formal qualities. That the book, the design of a book, kind of finds its own form out of the particular kind of collaboration and the conversations between the people involved in the content and the production. I've actually done very few straight out photo books. This one, which I was a co-author, is one that's close. There's a collaboration between a photographer and an architect who's also a poet, and me. And this was a series of one of two books that I did with a photographer who's largely a surf photographer, but then this was a series of photos he'd taken over about 20 years. It was these portraits of waves. Another cat photo is always popular. Another important part of my practice over the last sort of 15 years or so was buying a risograph and becoming kind of a printer. And so this enabled me to do things like make a motorcycle magazine with another friend, and self-publish and produce. So edit, design, print, bind, and distribute. And then to make other kind of artist books. And then in a grand escalation of that idea, a year and a half ago, I bought a Heidelberg offset press with another printmaker artist friend, and made this book for the which was an artist book for the Sydney Biennale last year. And so that is that's and I guess just to wrap this up, keep it within the sort of 5 to 7 minutes, I hope. The Heidelberg seems like a nice encapsulation of a lot of the things that I'm interested in, and I'm trying to capture in the PhD, which is about thinking of book design as a discursive practice. So we make books by talking, mostly, as much as we do putting things on page, using software or printing machines, and the different kinds of conversations that form books are evidence in their outcomes. So that's how they form their own particular thing. Okay, that's me.
Thank you.
Well, I have lots of questions for you later, Stuart. I'll just get my presentation up. Excellent. So my name's Libby Jeffery. I'm from Momento Pro, and our part in the making of photo books is the physical production of the books. We are printers and binders. We've been doing that since 2004. We started printing books for consumers, so mums and dads who just wanted to put their travel photos into books. Then we started working with wedding portrait commercial photographers, making albums for them. Then we advanced into the area that I'm particularly interested in, which is helping people to self-publish books. And I strongly believe that's the most viable option for most photo book creators in Australia. And we have different printing processes that we use. We don't do risograph, but we do digital printing and offset printing. We print books from a single copy up to, say, 250 copies or more, if you would like. But we introduced we have our standard print-on-demand books that you can order, but then we introduced what we call a volume order service, which to a traditional printer would sound not like volume, but our volume orders are from 25 copies to 250 copies, which is what we think is the most viable option or quantity for a self-publisher in Australia and New Zealand. So in addition to printing the books, we also have been supportive of the photo book community here. We established the Australia and New Zealand Photo Book Awards in 2011, the New Zealand Photo Book of the Year Awards in 2016, and it was 6 years ago that we had Photo Book Melbourne. Wasn't it 2015?
Yeah.
Yes, so if I'm doing my maths
Nice.
correct. Numbers are not my thing, letters and photos are my thing. But it's almost to the week, I believe, that we were here 6 years ago, and we helped with the hosting of the first ever dedicated photo book event in Australia, right? Yep. Which I was very proud of. We had a great time. And then we did the same thing the year after in New Zealand. We supported the first ever dedicated photo book event in New Zealand, Photobook New Zealand. And then last year we merged our two awards, Australia and New Zealand Photo Book Awards, together so we could continue hosting them. What I wanted to do is to show you how we actually, here's just a few images of how we physically make the books. They're all made in Sydney. We have a great team there. These are just a few of the different kinds of books that we produce. So we produce hardcover books with section sewing. This one by Harvey, I'm sure Harvey's delighted to see that he's still being discussed. We would produce books for Harvey Benj from New Zealand as proof books so that he could send them off to his international publishers. We produce booklets for students. We also have a student program where you get special discounts. This was a batch of booklets that we produced for PSC students this year. And I should point out here, this format for our book is a softcover book with staples down the side, which ironically is called saddle stitching. I never kind of understood that. There's your students' books. Yep. We also produce perfect bound soft covers, and we introduced these soft cover books later in the piece because we were responding directly to the self-publishing community, learning that people don't have big budgets, so you need, more affordable books. On top of that, though, you need books, if you want to distribute internationally, you need to have books that are lightweight and small in size so you can keep the shipping costs down, which people don't often think of. So these were promotional books for an editorial photographer. This is literally hot off the press. And this is by Ling Ang. And this is a custom book. So we have our standard book range, which you'll get the best pricing for if your budget is, you need to keep your budget under control. Or you can do something like what Ling has done, which is a book that had, I think, 40 transparency page inserts. And it's really stunning book design. You'd like it. And it also is a printed cover. So I just want you to understand that we have different price points. This is an expensive book. This, however, is even more expensive because it is an inkjet printed book onto cotton rag, 10 colours. It's archival, museum grade. We also do boxes. So this book will be 10 times our most affordable book. But that's the variety of options we have. I think the best advice I can offer to you today is how to go about finding a printer. You need to know what your minimum order quantity is. If you want to do, most trade printers do offset printing. Now they do more digital print on demand, I should say, but a traditional offset printer needs a minimum of around 600 copies or so. You may not be looking at 600 for yours, so just know what the minimum order quantity is that your printer provides. Find out what their standard sizes, binding formats and materials are. That'll keep your costs contained. They can go outside of that, but just be aware you'll pay for it. Print quality options. You may not need inkjet print quality. Most people don't, but if you're doing a legacy book, you might. What's the price range? Does it suit your budget? File specs. Find out from your printer what the file specifications are before you start designing your book, or you might have to spend quite a bit of time redoing things. Find out what colour space they work in and use their ICC profile so you can get an accurate sense of what the colour should be. Check if they do produce accurate colour in their books. We are a dedicated photo book photographer. We are all about accurate colour reproduction. I know people who've done runs overseas and done 3 runs of thousands of books and they haven't worked because the colour is inaccurate. So get a reference from somebody who's had printed with them. Get a proof copy if you can. We only provide proof copies for our volume orders because we can't provide one for a single copybook. Are they environmentally friendly in the materials they use and the way they do things, if that's something that matters to you? And most importantly, I feel, have they worked with Photobook self-publishers? Because a trade printer who doesn't work with artists or students may not be very responsive and service you very well. We, however, will. The other things you have to consider with your book, and Heidi, please cut me off if I'm too long.
Maybe we should, these are actually some of the questions I
All
have
right.
in my list.
Cool. All right. So we'll leave that. But there's lots of thinking that you have to do about, you know, when you're choosing your materials, how many to print, what the printing costs are. You can pay $5 for a book with us, or you can pay $5,000. Depends on the size, the quantity, the materials,
And
the
Jack
variations.
has to work overnight.
Yes, exactly, during the holidays. These are the kinds of things that increase costs. How to price your book. I've got some details there. I've done some analysis. But there you go. So that's my top tip. So Heidi, if you want to come back to that, we can come back.
We will come back to it. It's like otherwise I will have no questions and...
All right. But I'm glad I prepared it.
Oh.
Oh, and the only other thing is, yeah, if you want to learn more about self-publishing later, you can grab some of these booklets next door.
Awesome. Thank you. Rohan, do you want to tell us about your artist practice and bookmaking adventures? See, it was nice that we don't actually have a...
Sorry guys, a piece of paper, just so I can keep on track. Alright, I just need to find where mine is. Okay, I'm trying to work out how to view full screen. Does any Libby?
Actually, I am no technical guru.
See how we go.
As you can see, we know how to design photo books, but
Yeah,
the
we just
computer
don't
is
know
a
how
bit
to-
challenging.
Okay. Done. Right. I guess a bit of background info about myself is I'm a Melbourne-based photographic artist, publisher, book designer. Majority of my work revolves around the transformation of space and a relationship with the environment, architectural and environmental awareness. It's just a few shots of my exhibiting work. Over the last 5 years or so, I've been heavily involved in making and conceptually thinking of my work in photobook form. Worked with publishers, self-published my own and created artist books. It all started about 5 years ago. I started working in some bookstores, one with Molly. When I published my first book, A Brief Stroll Whilst Inspecting Architecture. This kind of sits in between a zine and a photo book, which is where a lot of my work kind of sits. It was printed offset edition of 700 copies. I had some contacts in Japan, so I actually decided to use a Japanese printer and use those. Since then, I really kind of fell in love with the idea of how work translates in book form and I guess how some of my favourite photos simply don't work in books, and some of my least favourite photos tie everything together in a book. I've also worked with publishers who have published my work. An error has occurred published by Printer Editions. A City in Itself, published by the Velvet Cell, which are based in Berlin. And I create artist books, and these could range from editions of 2. The top one's a book made of acrylic sheets and Duroc clears, to editions of, say, 8 or 10. With publishing in my work, I kind of look at the work and then decide whether this book needs to be a handmade book edition of 2 or whether it's actually made for commercial purposes, and try to have a good think about the projects when I create books. Alongside all this, I have a background in fine art. I'm also currently enrolled in the Masters of Communication Design at RMIT, where the focus is publication design. And for the last, say, 3 years or so, I've also been a mentor for PSC for Masters of Photography program. Last year, I took on a new adventure, and this is ACB Press, which is a multidisciplinary practice I've kind of started up about 6 months ago, which revolves around the photo book. So it's publishing, it's a reference-based library, so books that inform my practice and made me think about the photographing book form, and a studio as well. This is the second title, which I released maybe about a month ago, which is a Melbourne photographer called Pierce Leal, and it's a field guide to see new land. That's a few shots of it, and that is about it. So,
Thanks, Stuart.
no worries, sorry if I spoke too fast.
We still have Molly to tell us a little bit about her background.
I don't have a presentation, so that's good. Because I'm just a bookseller.
It's the most important part of the bookmaking.
Yeah. And I guess I've been a bookseller, a buyer, for about 25 years. And yeah, I've seen a lot of sort of things change and what have you. And I think that there's things that I would probably talk about, which I imagine would be within your questions and stuff. So I'll try and keep it brief. But I guess the main takeaway things for me would be to say, do your research and find out how to go about getting your books into bookshops if that's what you want to do before you start printing them. Work out about the costing of it, and I have got information about that which I can give you if you message me afterwards or whatever, which is, you know, sort of these are things that I've come across over the years that people, I feel, you know, could do with the advice. I think artists can publish for fairs and exhibitions and what have you, perhaps in a slightly different, not in a different way, but as a bookseller, I've noticed things like, you know, having your name on a book and having a photo, like a representation of your work on the cover of a book is quite important. It's not always important, and there's no kind of rules, and there's some amazing books without, particularly with someone's name on it. That's a real thing for me, because I just feel like, you know, you can say, oh, you know, that pink book with the alligator on it, or you can say, I know who Robert Frank is because I've lifted that book. I've shelved that book that many times and I've seen it. And so I guess that's would be something that I would mention. And yeah, I think the other thing I would mention as well, which is, sorry, this is a bit disjointed, is that in terms of the book trade, timing is sort of everything. And if I actually don't get approached very much with local things, which sort of surprises me a bit. But
you will after today.
I will after. Well, that'd be good because I'm really keen on supporting people and what have you. But I think the main thing I want to get out today is to say that in bookselling, timing really is everything. And if people approach booksellers after something has been published, after it's come out, it's kind of a bit too late, in a sense. Like, not always. And if I am pursuing something, it kind of doesn't really matter so much to me. But if I know, and I've seen, you know, through social media and other things, that something's already been out, it sort of, I just feel like that would be one of my big takeaway things for everybody, to get in touch with people. And, you know, people don't answer emails and, you know, what have you. But if I know that I've seen the email and it was my fault that I didn't answer it, or, you know, that kind of thing, yeah, that's as a bookseller. And I think, but, you know, if you are publishing more, as I say, for fairs and galleries and things like that, you know, it's a different animal. Yeah.
I think this is already a very important point. I never certainly thought about to actually get in touch with a bookseller buyer before the book comes out. I would have thought it's like I would need to come with my physical copy and impress you and then get your...
The main, I think, thing of it would be is that if I have seen, like, people have come to me with stuff that's been out for 6 or 12 months, and they say, well, I'm selling it here, here and here. And part of me, because I'm so insecure and neurotic, is like, why didn't you tell me? Piss off. that's me.
Well, no one wants to be last.
No, but I think it's a respectful kind of profession, and I think the thing with me would be that bookselling is a trade, and I just feel like there's certain ways that things are kind of done, and just in any kind of thing, and I think to sort of have a level playing field and to have, like, I think it's great that there's people, like there's a new publisher called Love Your Mum, and this guy Oscar, he just did it beautifully. Like, he sent me an email, introduced the book, said it was coming out, he had his artist statement there, an image, all of this stuff. I'd love to come and show it to you. And then I think he's with Perimeter and Lulu's, and it's so great that we're all like supporting him and doing that whole thing. But it all kind of happened at the launch of it. It all kind of happened, at a time with momentum, and that's, I guess, what I'm trying to convey.
I guess it makes sense. It's like it would be the same for you guys. It's like you wouldn't want to be like, after the book has been sitting there for 6 months under your bed, and then suddenly people approach you. So, Lindsay, sorry, how are we going for time? Because I actually had a few warm-up questions, but maybe we actually need to get straight to the...
We've got time.
We've got time. Okay, so before we actually go into all of the nitty-gritties, I actually always am curious about what was your most impactful interaction with the photo book? Was there a question? That was...
Yeah.
I just looked at Libby and I'm like, did I forget half of the sentence? Should I start with an easier one?
I've got an answer for you.
Okay.
Like, one of the most, the biggest impact for a book that I experienced, and impact is a really good word to use, was James Nachtwey's Inferno book. I remember when I first encountered that, it was like, the content, the photographs on the inside are really heavy, emotionally disturbing, and the weight and the size of the book and the dark cover with the strong embossing, it all kind of played into the book itself and how it worked. And then I suppose just one other example is we did a book a few years ago for Stephen DuPont that was a 40-metre concertina book that was called Typhoon, and he specifically crafted it, the size, the dimensions, the materials to reflect the content on the inside, and it was all about the weight, and you felt like you were immersed in it and overwhelmed by it. And that's what I love when we see, and we don't see a lot of it, is when people think about everything from the images they put on the page in the sequence to the paper they choose to the cover material and the size and the packaging they use, and it all adds and builds to it. And I think that's the most important thing. And that's what, to me, that a book that has an impact for me is one that manages to do all that.
What about you, Rohan?
Probably the book that's had the most impact would have been this. I'm into a lot of, small press stuff from spending a lot of time in Japan, and it was one by M Studio, who are still actively running, but they're not massive publishers. They will just kind of publish a few kind of zine things. And I picked up this book in a Japanese bookstore, and it was beautiful. And simply, it was a $25 book. I think 28 pages. Just beautiful stock, maybe 12 images, and it really spoke to me and said, oh, hang on, a beautiful book doesn't need to be $100 hardback. And basically I kind of based my first book on that and just kind of kept that in the back of my mind that as a self-publisher, I'm always limited with money. So I kind of take those constraints and try to design with that in mind. Try to make something that's beautiful and humble, within the constraints that I've been given.
Oh, there are so many constraints. It's like making a photo book begins with constraints, strangely enough. What about you, Stuart? What impressed you?
I think the as you were talking, I was remembering a I think I can't remember when this book came out. Oh, I can. It was like a year or two into the American war in Afghanistan, and it was this amazing book that Mavis van Dersen designed, this Dutch design studio, and it was called Why Mr. Why. Do you remember who's the publisher of it?
I don't know that.
It was anyway. It was just. I remember it was. I think the thing that was remarkable about it is that they started out. It's a book of photojournalism from the first couple of the first 9 months, I think, of that war, and it was a Dutch photojournalist, and they started out thinking that they would try and find these kind of like 10 or 20 kind of iconic images from the beginning of this thing, and then in the conversation of making the book, they're like, no, it actually photojournalism has changed, and there are like thousands of photos, and they're all kind of really important, and so it became this kind of really thick book, but printed really cheaply and quickly, and so it wasn't this precious thing. It was like this really urgent thing. Like it was printed like a magazine, and it had this. They did this lovely thing where they kind of after they bound the book, they ran the foredge back through the milling blade of Perfect Binder to rough up the front edge to make it feel like a newspaper, and it was just these tiny little kind of touches that made it this really compelling thing.
It's amazing. It's like those first photo books, they inspire so much. They inspire your next book. They inspire, like they always say, Dave, in 20 years later. Do you remember the first ever book you were? Because for you, it's not necessarily photo books, but...
The first book that really had an impact on me, which is sort of funny, is David Byrne from Talking Heads did a book, I think in '95, called Strange Ritual, and it was it was like a mock leather bound black book with gold embossed cover, and this belly band of Bollywood, like a kind of like graffiti Bollywood poster, I think it was, from memory. I don't have my belly band on anymore, but they are brilliant, those things. And it's just all these sort of photographs that I think he took over the years and travelled a lot in Mexico and India, and some kind of peculiar books and things like that. But it was just one of those things. I actually remember I was at my first book selling job, Pentimento in Balmain in Sydney, and it was like, you know, when you hear a piece of music and you just feel this thing in you going, like, this is who I am, or something. And it was sort of like that in this really intense way. I can't believe I've just done that one. But, you know, yeah, anyway, move on.
No, I love it, like how this object, like be it from architecture or music or photography, it's like it just leaves this impact on you. Like it touches you in so many different ways that, like, I guess like we are here like to talk about photo books, but like it's so much more than a photo book. It's like coming from background from music, it's like, I don't know, there's so much to... I don't know, I love books. Anyway. I have one more question before we I actually had a few more, but I can't quite decide which one to... Okay, here's a good one. What are the things that excite you now when you see a book that you didn't think about before? Anyone?
I'd like to respond by saying that there was a book by Ying that I knew a lot about, or I'd seen it. To be fair, I'd seen it. I picked it up. It was called Gold Coast on the New York Art Book Fair a few years ago, and I realised that I'd never looked at it properly until I sat down until I heard her speak. I heard her speak in New Zealand, and the thing that I learned from that experience was that you kind of have to engage with the book. Sometimes you can glance through a book and not understand it properly. It's not until you take the time to do it or you hear the artist or the creator speak. And to me, that's something, dealing with self-publishers, I don't see enough, I don't think, of the artist speaking about their work and explaining it. So when I heard more, that changed I approach to the book. I don't know if that's quite the answer.
And the understanding of it?
Yeah, and what drove them to produce. I fell in love with the story that drove Ying to do it, and the multi-layered levels of meaning that I hadn't got from just sitting down and glancing at it myself. Like, and it's different. Like when we're in a bookstore, you don't see all those layers sometimes, and you don't have time. So showing things online or in writing helps.
For me, I guess it's seeing the relationship between a book designer and a photographer play out, and just something that gets executed in a perfect way. Like the way photographs are exhibited is a very, very different ballgame to how photographs are presented in a book. So I've just there's a few examples at home that there is just this amazing relationship between designer and photographer play out within the publication.
Oh, it's a dream come true.
But that doesn't always happen.
No.
That's a combo, right?
Do you have a book you constantly keep going back to, Stuart?
I one of the first books I always show students when I'm teaching is one called Langer List, which is by Spectre, and I think it's because in terms of like seeing things that you just in a way that you changing the way you can think about a book. I kind of love how it changed for me the way you might tell a story in a book. Like it was, so it's this book of essentially accounts from a family. Like the matriarch of the family kept these exhaustive accounts in these notebooks, and like from 1979 to 1996, 97.
Like financial accounts.
Yeah, but with like all the like notes of like family purchases, like they bought this car and they bought that, like, and then so all like just this fine grained kind of detail of this couple of decades of this family, and it, like the book is just like the list, but it's punctuated with all like family photographs and photographs of advertisements from the time of those things that they bought, and it tells the story of this family through in the most personal, stunning kind of way. And it still kind of blows me away.
I love it when you have these books that you like you don't forget them, but like they still give you something. Like as an object, a book can give you something after 5 years, after 10 years. It's like a book is not just like, I guess sometimes it can be you take it home and you look through and go done. But like most of the good books, like they just always make you keep coming back. It's like, I imagine it's the same for you. I don't know, as a bookseller, I guess you get to see so much as a book buyer. Like what impresses you?
You see a lot, but I mean, you couldn't get everything that you
of course.
wanted. And also, you can't, like, with the journey of distance is significant, and cost. Things like, I don't know if I'm answering the question now, but just being able to get stuff in is a challenge, and in terms of like importing stuff and what have you. I don't think I'm answering the question.
It's okay. We just go to other questions. There are plenty here. Maybe.
But I think, anyway, go on.
So, I'm not actually quite sure, maybe you guys can advise me. So it's like I have all these questions for all these 4 lovely speakers. Should I ask just one person through, or would you find it easier to get someone's, I guess, like whole practice or the way they think or the way they communicate, or is it actually fine to jump through different experiences from design to buying to printing to doing? What was option 4?
Asking us all.
Okay, we go back to, again, I don't know, I'm always very fascinated with basic questions. It's like, I know, like, if you find them dull, please just look on your iPhone or I come back to it. So, Stuart, it's like, what inspired you to become a designer? It goes back so far.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I think as a kid I was good at art, and I was good at English, and I was good at nothing else. Like I was dreadful at math, and I was dreadful at and like in school I'm talking about. And I think there was something about the art and English, the kind of words and pictures that sort of formed into like the graphic design kind of made sense.
Nice. Libby?
Can I make a comment on that?
Please.
Because we see so many bad book designs because we take them from anyone. And then it's so easy to see the great photobook designs. But one thing that people very rarely get right is the combination of photography and text. And is there any tips that you could give that just the simplest things?
Boy, that's my question. No, please.
Oh, we're going to
No.
Tips. I guess just like trying to I guess I would say that I would advise a kid like to think about what the pictures need. Like in the photo book context, where like the photo is the photos are the thing. You know, the text is probably contextualizing them, or it's playing second fiddle. You know, and so in that sense, I would think about what those photos need, and like if they need the text to leave well enough alone, then do that. If it needs to. But if it needs to run as a running commentary, then do that, and think about like I think one of the things that I often do early in a book design process is I consult my library and my the books that I love, and I look at the relationship between text and image, but also I think about like what's a useful kind of book for this to be like. Should this photo book actually take cues from a dictionary, or or a telephone book, or some odd combination, or should it be like a classic 1970s conceptual art kind of book? Like, you know, what kind of typographic structures are going to complement these photos? And take cues from those. Like there's lots to be learned from the books that are already in the world.
Oh, and the foundries of type designers, they are just expanding. They are just like, it's amazing how many great typography fonts there are. It's like every day I find a new favorite one. It's like every day I find like, and I love it. It's like there are so many out there who offer you trial versions, so you can actually try your. I don't know, like, sorry, I could talk for hours on typography. It's like, there's like this relationship that has to be, and never use Comic Sans. So it's as simple as that.
I don't know.
Oh!
But, I mean, do work with the designer also.
So let's go back to Libby and to my question. So you started the awards in 2011. Tell us about, because like you said, you're actually doing mainly, or like your big part of your audience who buys the books are mums and dads and coffee table books.
Yeah.
What inspired you to actually do a photography award, a contemporary one?
Because we had so many people, or actually not so many, in the scheme of things, we had a group of people who brought us incredibly beautiful books with photographs that needed to be seen, but they didn't have an avenue to get them out there, and they also didn't know how to go about publishing. And so and it's an area of personal interest, and I just thought we need to create a forum or a platform for this work to be seen. And I know there were people who were interested in doing that anyway, but we had the ability to host the awards. And in the early days, it was just our customers, but then we went broader, and you don't have to be our customer to enter it at all. But what it proved was that once you had a platform to kind of have the entries come in and then to showcase and promote the winners, I think the community grew around that as well and became stronger. And then, Photobook Melbourne, like, it was just a natural evolution, but basically to get the work seen and to help people understand how they can either self-publish if they want to get their work seen, or approach an independent publisher or a trade publisher. That was the premise behind it, and to give people the means, the winners, the means to be able to self-publish.
And I think it's been very important to actually have such an award in Australia, like to recognize good work, to actually elevate and help to promote photographers, not just like not just within Australia, but like these awards have always like been noticed overseas. And I think like being so far away, it is really amazing. And thank you very much for continuing to do it. It's like, it's been amazing for photographers to have that opportunity. So every year, like there are like, sometimes one or two winners if we can't decide, and then like all the finalists. And these people's work would not have really made it past the Australian shores most of the times. So to have that opportunity, like to introduce them to a new audience overseas, I found actually quite amazing. And
that was just an evolution too, because we didn't know either. We realised they weren't being seen overseas, so that's why we sent them out.
Yeah. Now, Rohan, so you actually self-published for the last 5 or 6 years, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, end of 2014, my first book came out.
Yeah. And then I want to know, how has your practice since changed? Like, do you now think of every time like you do a project, it has to be a book? Or do you think this one will be an exhibition, or sometimes will it be both? And does it change your relationship to how you photograph or how you produce the book?
Some of my projects are I generally do like a major project, which will be maybe a 2 or 3 year span of conceptual thought to execution. I also actually do kind of like mini projects in between to, say, with publication design, to play with photography and to experiment. I think that's really helped me not only keep my motivation up, but really kind of, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but play with design. And then these days, probably actually all my work is generally based with a book in mind of some sort.
So does the book come before the project?
Well, there'll be an idea, so there'll be a conceptual idea of what the project is about, and most of it's conceptual, based on historic design or architectural photography theory or so on, or it will be influenced by a book I pick up, and then I'll base it. Over the months, I'll kind of process all the information. Then once, I usually have the conceptual idea before I pick up a camera. So I will literally pick up a camera maybe once a year. That's it. Go away, shoot for 2 weeks.
But then I guess like the whole process, so it's like, I guess like by making the book, you must have thought, it's like, okay, I want this kind of image to tell this kind of story to lead into this. So then you actually just go and take those photos you have in your mind, or?
No, so I'll have a conceptual idea of like, okay, this is what the project's about. And then I'll just go and photograph. Then I'll bring everything back. And as I work out the design of a publication, which could take a year and a half, and it could end up being one book, or it could end up being 4 books or whatever of the same body of work. That kind of the selection of images and everything plays out kind of organically. I'm consistently looking at books. At the moment, it's been, for the last few years, it's been kind of 1960s Japanese photography magazines, and looking at layouts and editorials. And I think all that happens organically, and then sometimes, most of my work will then be exhibited in a different form, in a gallery or so on, which is just a very different way of presenting the work. So I kind of think that one body of work, just say there's 20 images, maybe we'll just say there's 25 images or whatever, they could be in the book, and then when I exhibit the work, that could be simply just 8 images, and then that's all needs to be shown. So I think it's...
So has your, one more little question to this, it's like, so you did your first book and then you've been producing books in the meantime, and then like now you actually went to study like publications design. So was that actually an inspiration from doing your first book, so the whole 5 years actually led up to this, or how did you...
I think it has. Deciding to do a master's in something I haven't done an undergrad in, and in publication design, that just kind of organically happened and just made sense within the last year or so. Completely falling in love with photobook and art book design and art books. Just seemed like the natural next step. You come to realise that a photographer can't necessarily be a designer. They can do a certain amount, but then that's about it. I was really interested in typography. A lot of my early books, I certainly think I chose the wrong font. And that's something that
but you can only say that now in hindsight, because you have learned so much in terms of producing and designing and thinking about the relationships.
Yeah.
They are still amazing books. Like I can't actually remember typography.
But I think photographers need to realise they're not designers.
Thank you. I've been saying this for the last...
They can design, but there's a very big difference between a good designer who works with a photographer for a project than just myself, as I did, just trying to do everything myself.
Yeah, but I think it's also amazing. It's like you have to begin somewhere, and sometimes there is not a budget for a designer. So it's like to actually sit down and go through the sequencing, and it's like it's better to do that than not to do it at all. Like if you would not have even begun 6 years ago, you would not be here. So it's like, yes, there might not be a budget, but like if you don't have that budget, still begin, like still do it. Use Comic Sans if you have to, but like...
I think with that stuff,
No, I didn't.
that if, I think if you keep it, in my opinion and from what I've seen, I think if people try and do like, who aren't a designer and who don't quite get it right for whatever reason, and they've tried to create a book as an object, that's where I feel like it can be unsuccessful. But I think that if you look at some of like the classic books, and you look at things, and this is where I can be a bit old-fashioned, and it's not, like I love lots of different things, but I just think of like books that I adore, like The Ballad of Sexual Dependency by Nan Goldin, and just think amazing title, amazing photographer who I know because it's written on the cover, and like one of the most iconic. I didn't mention that again, did I? And an incredible photo, and that's a pretty raw bit of book design, and it's amazing.
But it's not raw, it's actually classic. It's like everything is considered. True. It's like that's a thing just because...
But I think now, I mean, compared to when that book was, created and designed, I mean, anyone with a Mac, really, who's got an eye, could do that, if their work is good enough.
Yes, exactly. The work support the classic format.
Well, if it's, but I mean, and I'm not saying that it would be an art as a book as an object, it wouldn't be, it would be in a different realm to what something like Stuart would produce. But I don't know, I think when I say raw, I just feel like things that are, I guess it's a bit of a kind of punk DIY aesthetic, of just kind of like throwing something down and letting it land and trusting it and leaving it alone can be some of the best stuff, in my opinion.
I think sorry, on that basis, I think I completely agree with Molly, and it's using the design to suit the work. My favourite book I have is a $5 newspaper. and he's completely executed so well, and it's probably just a photographer doing it himself. So it's just, I guess, it's complementing the design, whether it be cut and paste, collage, text on a piece of paper with an image next to it, or so I think it's.
I think the thing here also is that I think some of the most compelling zines were done with zero knowledge, right, of layout conventions, or you think about what Punk did for publication design. It's extraordinary. And for music, but I think yes, side thing. I guess I think in this sense, like you can, but what they were doing was about the content and the ideas and the kind of the energy. They didn't. They were trying to not do typography and not do conventions, right? And so that's how they made something really new. And I feel like if you want if you're a photographer and you want the design of your book to really add something to it, then work with the designer that you like and who knows what they're doing. But also go about it in the naive way as well, and something magical can also kind of happen.
Oh, absolutely.
But just don't think that that's going to happen, because I think there are just, particularly with typography, there are details that you just won't see, right? Because it's a really deep well, typography.
It's like I see, unfortunately, so many great books, but the typography, I'm always smirking. Not smirking, but I'm always disappointed, because typography is such a intricate. It's it's the poem that actually brings it all together, and so often I see it done badly that I'm just but the book is still great. So it's we have 10 minutes, so I need to unfortunately go much quicker than anticipated. Molly, price points.
Price points, okay. Well, I would say, I think that there's something about the point in which, please, just excuse myself before I start saying this, but it's going to sound really
Just say it.
An idiot, but I think that where you are in your career and where you are in your life and where you are in the market and where the world is today, I think that there's an element of modesty that can really pay off. And I don't mean modesty in terms of an 8-page publication, but in terms of thinking, okay, well, really, if I want to get my work out there and I want to get into some bookshops and, maybe doing something that's, $30 or $40 is about where I'm at. And even though I would love to do a linen-bound, amazing kind of thing, I'm just wondering whether, my body of work or, or whatever it is sort of at that place, even though I love those linen-bound books or that I love things that, So I think that's, and I feel like that's a really good way of sort of honestly kind of floating or falling into a market. And in terms of price points, honestly, anyone who's interested, do message me because I've got this thing.
Books and reams of information.
Reams about pricing, and basically, I'll just tell you if you can bear it. Books are basically a 40% margin. So it's 60% to the author, the artist, and 40% to the bookshop.
Yeah.
But there's also GST. So that's sort of 10% on top of that. And I've got formulas. It does me no good whatsoever to disperse this information. I'm not spruiking anything, but I know that people find it really hard to find out about this stuff. So I guess one thing I haven't mentioned, I guess, is that we're doing a photozine fair as part of the Melbourne Art Book Fair that starts on the 26th of next month, and everyone's welcome to participate, and everyone who puts in a zine will be involved. But part of that, in terms of price point, I made a few suggestions because I had some questions about parameters and whatever. And I suggested to do it, maybe making it $20. Part of the thing I was thinking of doing a talk about this pricing thing, which I'm not doing anymore. But if you do a book that sells for $20, you'll sell it to me for $12. And that's the thing that when I said at the very beginning about finding out about all of this stuff before you
just
start.
broke everyone's heart.
And that's but then there's tax, all this kind of stuff involved in it. But that's what you, I believe, really need to get your head around. And that will change, what you how you might decide to print it or the quantities that you do and what have you. But finding that information out in the first place is So if it's a $35 book, it'd be $21. You'd get $21 for it.
Well, make sure to, we get your details and everyone can get a... Oh, yeah. Now, we have 5 minutes left, so this went much quicker than anticipated. Any questions? How can we help? Great, you got it all sorted. Yes?
I'm in the process of creating a book, and the one piece of advice that keeps coming up is work with a designer, build a reputation with a designer, work really closely with them. I don't know any designers.
Well, you have 2 here already.
Yeah. Will you guys take a look at my book? I'm just wondering, as a photographer, it's quite easy to find inspiration, photographic inspiration, but aside from looking at books that I like and noticing who designed them, I don't know any sources or any online sites that promote designers' work, and I think that would be really useful, and I'm wondering if you guys know where I could find designers.
No. You might have better information.
I think some of the things you're doing already, like looking at books that you like and seeing who designed them and getting in touch with them. Talking to people like Perimeter who publish and distribute, but also have a network of designers. And then there are other things like the AGDA, the Australian Graphic Design Association, has and the Australian Book Designers Association. They both have listings of members on their websites, and they often have samples of work as well, so you can so that's a few things.
Also, maybe to actually.
Yeah.
At the end of the year, lots of students also present their work, so you could definitely not only cheaper or more collaboratively contacting students.
Yeah, just wanted to.
And contradicting myself, which I often do, what I did in the first quite few books I created was I didn't necessarily have the funds, or if I was just going to make a book which is only a few copies, I didn't necessarily want to approach a designer. I basically looked at books which had a similar aesthetic to what I wanted my book to be, and looked at the font, typography, layout, especially with the the text, and just used that to influence my own kind of designing as I went along. You could also get some students after you, if you're going to do it yourself. You could get some students or put the word around, get someone to have a look at it, or get a copywriter just to check the text.
You've just inspired me to publish a blog post that I've been meaning to do for quite a while. Looking at
me at the bottom.
But I've been this is a question we get asked all the time: who could design my book? And there's a difference between, layout design is different to web design, but then photobook layout design is different to other publication designers. So I've been looking at a list of people in Australia and New Zealand who have designed books for Australian and New Zealand photographers and photobook makers, having a look at who the designers are in the books next door, looking at who Perimeter does their design with, so keep your eye on our newsletter and there'll be a blog post coming up soon.
With your name in it. So, one more question maybe? Yeah?
Yeah, so talked about design, but not curation, selection, and sequencing. So my question is about curation, so selection and sequencing. So working with a designer to do that, or working with curators, photographers to do that? What would your advice be?
Look, I guess it depends. Some designers have an understanding of photography and storytelling. It's like sometimes it's easier to work with a curator because it's their field. I guess it just depends. How do you work with your, because you work with different artists, do they come to you and go, okay, here's the sequence I want, or do you actually influence?
For me, I like, that seems like an important part of the design of the book, particularly if there's, particularly with Photobooks where the sequence is such an enormous part of it. That's kind of there's aside from whatever typographic things are going on, often the sequence is a big thing, but it's really a conversation. There was not a book that I showed, but a book for that same surf photographer. The second book that we did, he set up a sequence, and we were really happy with it. And then I thought of something, and I kind of rearranged it to do this other thing, and it showed him the work in a totally new way. And he was like, "Oh yes, this is great. Let's do it like that." And both would have been really fine. It was just but I think it meant more to both of us because of how we'd done it together, how he showed me the work and then how I kind of re-showed it back to him. So I think, but it depends on the work. It really depends on the work. If it's done in a particular way that needs to be in a particular order, then of course it needs to be in that order.
I guess I've always up until now, I've always sequenced myself, which is becoming easier and easier, but then the introduction of a designer or the introduction of somebody whose opinion you trust may transform the work into something else in a great way. Photographers, I think, are very subjective, and I've tried to put certain images into books, going, this is my favourite image, and simply doesn't work in a book. So I think it's trusting your own instincts, but also being open to a conversation with somebody regarding the work.
That's my problem. So you use the word precious before you do it. I'm very precious about my practice and my opinions, so they don't get out there. So how do we overcome that? How do we? So there you go. This is extension.
I think you just need
I think we might need another hour for that.
Well, I can ask my therapist later.
Yeah.
I think as a photographer, I have to be open to just letting it go. I guess I do kind of small, more personal artist books because I'm quite arrogant and I want this book to be made a certain way. But I also kind of think of that commercially sense as well, and then could work with a designer or get some good friends whose opinions I trust who say, look, this is the idea, this is the statement or whatever, this is the work, can you have a look at it and let me know what you think? And being open and just going, yeah, okay, cool.
I think the thing is being open about it. It's a collaboration. If you want to work with a designer or a curator, it's an open collaboration for them to say, no, that's maybe not the best image to use. Actually, let's not use it at all. Let's use this instead. It's a conversation.
And
But-
respect. I think respect is important, that the designer respects the photographer.
Oh, both ways.
Because I've seen square pegs pushed into round holes.
Absolutely.
And it's a shame.
But we have to unfortunately finish. Thank you very much for coming. It was amazing. Thank you.